I have some thoughts. Tell me what you think. Now, I've just recently finished playing Sonic Frontiers on the hardest difficulty, and I have to say, I have very mixed feelings about it. It's complicated, but I think I'll manage. I guess to billboard this, I'll just have to say that, while most certainly it isn't a bad game, I wish Sonic Frontiers was as good as the reception makes it seem. I saw an overabundance of goodwill and praise being thrown towards the newest game in the franchise, suggesting it to be one of the good Sonic games, as the series is seemingly plagued with a strange stigma of on-again, off-again quality. In regards to 3D Sonic games, I've played Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, I've played Shadow of the Hedgehog, Sonic 06, Sonic Unleashed, and Sonic Generations, so while not the most die-hard fan, I've at least seen some of what 3D Sonic has to offer. Honestly, I was excited to see how far the franchise had come. It didn't take long for that to bleed out of me, though. I'll try to keep things somewhat vague as to not spoil anything, for the sake of the uninitiated, but even if I did, I don't feel like I'll be doing you much of a disservice. For our characters, we have Sonic, Tails, and Amy traveling on Tails' plane when they are sucked into a wormhole and end up on a nearly deserted island full of these little rock people called Cocos. Tails and Amy, along with some others, are seemingly partially sucked into cyberspace, rendering them unable to interact with the world around them, unless convenient for the plot, I guess. In addition to this, we also have Eggman, Sonic's longtime enemy and rival, who prior to the start of the game had gotten himself sucked into cyberspace while examining these strange monuments. He's accompanied by his newly created AI assistant, Sage. These are our major players in the story, with the real antagonist only making themselves fully known in the last 30 minutes or so. To put it bluntly, I'm tired of the cardboard cutout characters, and Sonic himself also falls into that trap, in addition to his friends. These characters have not grown or changed practically since their introduction decades ago. Knuckles is still the brash rival character, perhaps now softened a bit since Shadow took the explicit rival's role. Tails is always trying to become his own man, or Fox, I guess, not to be stuck in Sonic's shadow, his actual shadow, not the... never mind. And Amy, while she has grown away from the ridiculous boy-crazy stereotype and into a more self-sufficient character, she isn't really used here for much more than generic platitudes of helping others and wanting a better world. Funnily enough, that's also Sonic's problem. He doesn't have a specific opinion on anything. When faced with a problem, he'll always apply the same generic logic to it, just barrel on through and eventually he'll figure it out. Several characters point out the problems that are plaguing them or others currently, and Sonic's response to how he'll fix the problem is that he'll just figure it out when he gets there, which is particularly frustrating because he is there. Right now, Sonic, the problem is happening right now. The characters are discussing how to solve the problem. Why aren't you talking about how to fix it? By the end of the conversation with these characters, I feel like I've gained no ground, and I'm no further than when the conversation started, and I would continue to feel that way for 10 hours of game time until the last 2 hours or so when things start to be revealed. Up until then, and even well into the last 2 hours, I would feel that these characters didn't have a worthwhile thought cross between their ears or out of their mouths. It felt like filler, and perhaps that could be chalked up to an attempt to steer the series onto some sort of narrative track. It is worth noting that several previous adventures and characters, some from even the comics, are mentioned by the characters in an attempt to try and combine the greater Sonic universe. That's all well and good, and even graciously welcomed, but here the result is clunky and somewhat of a slog. For most of the game, Eggman and his AI Sage are the same way, shooting the breeze and vaguely wasting time, albeit in a somewhat more entertaining fashion. Eggman's obnoxiously petty in the best way, but Sage is going through that classic trope of the robot discovering their own humanity and what it means to be alive. It's been done to death before, and no new ground is really covered here. That being said, I did find something of significant value along a side path. The fishing minigame, and don't worry, we'll get to the fishing minigame, you can collect these egg memos, little recordings that Dr. Eggman had made and seemingly lost. They are very recent, and they revolve around his entrapment within cyberspace, his feelings on Sonic and his friends, as well as Sage itself. The particularly interesting point comes from his slowly growing affection for her. That's right, her. He goes from seeing her as an it, a program, to her, his own daughter, even going so far as to ask her what she would like to be called. That's an incredible addition to his character. It's a wonderful new facet to approach. It's an actual sign of growth and progress in this franchise, seeing Eggman act in the role of a father. And while it is as fun as it is, it doesn't last forever, and I can only assume we'll return to the status quo as usual. Hope I'm wrong though, their dynamic is rather sweet. Now there's the game part of the game. The large open island sections are going to comprise most of your playtime, as it did mine. The wide and expansive plains give you a nice playground to really stretch Sonic's legs. In most outings in previous titles, Sonic was relegated to narrow halls or 2D platforms, but here he has a whole horizon to race across, and it feels good. For once, I actually feel like I'm in control of the character, instead of trying to wrestle with him to get him to go in the direction that I want. In fact, I think this iteration of Sonic is the best controlling one that I've ever had the chance to pilot. I like it. A lot. With that being said, the open world segments have their own problems. Of note is the fact that there isn't really much going on these islands. You'll find various small, I guess you would call them jungle gyms. They're like compact segments taken from an actual Sonic level, usually consisting of a few springs, some rails, and maybe some walls. They're mostly automated in their function, and they often end with you collecting some rings and a friend token or a power-up. They're all over the place, and they end up making the landscape look like a McDonald's play place. Or they would if the game's render distance wasn't so short. Calling them a puzzle might be overselling it, which, like I said, they are like playground equipment, built with intent and perhaps visually pleasing to look at, but ultimately of little substance, particularly after the 20th one, and definitely after the 200th one. I mentioned friend tokens. You see, in order for Sonic to converse with his friends, he needs to obtain a certain number of arbitrary tokens spread around the island. He then dumps the tokens into them like coins into a slot machine, and then they pay out in exposition. At several points, this is required to advance the plot, but there are also secondary conversations that are not required, spread around each island as well. Collecting currencies is the name of the game, and boy do they have plenty of shiny objects for you to stuff into your pockets? There are previously mentioned friend tokens, matched to a specific friend on that island, like the first island having Amy tokens, for Amy. Obviously, this feels artificial at best and tedious at worst, and I'm sure you can imagine why. Additionally, in order to play any of the more traditional Sonic stages, the cyberspace levels, you must collect at least one gear, some of them requiring more gears, to spend to activate the stage. These can be found by defeating certain powerful robots, ones that generally function as mini-boss fights. Upon completing the cyberspace stages, you gain a number of keys based on what objectives you completed, like collecting a certain number of rings, touching special red rings, beating the stage under a specific amount of time, and simply finishing the stage at all. If you complete all of these on the stage, you get a bonus number of keys. Keys unlock the altars on the islands that house the Chaos Emeralds, allowing you to progress the main story. There are many more currencies, ones for upgrading Sonic, others for going fishing, etc., but ones I've already mentioned are the important ones. And speaking of fishing, actually, the fishing minigame is odd. It's totally optional and incredibly simple, requiring you to basically time a single button press to capture a random fish and receive a number of special coins for said fish. You spend these special coins on a few things, some of which are the previously mentioned currencies that allow you to progress with the game. Funnily, this does mean that you can beat a large portion of the game simply through fishing, especially if you wait for the weird star shower event that occurs every so often. Oh, by the way, these are incredibly obnoxious and very intrusive. They suck. Personally, I don't want a gotcha slot machine in the middle of my screen while running at Mach 1, thanks, but hey, maybe that's your thing. Anyway, you can really rack up the fishing tokens during a star shower if you want to, allowing you to bypass most of the game, which is a strange design choice to say the least. By the end of my playtime, even practically ignoring the star showers altogether, I had accrued nearly 300 fishing tokens and splurged a little near the end, mostly purchasing the egg memos, but also some stat increasing items as well. I mentioned the cyberspace levels earlier, let's go into those for a minute. The cyberspace stages adopt one of the various types of gameplay from the previous games, either opting for a behind-the-shoulder forward-running style, like many of Sonic Unleashed daytime stages, but also various other 3D Sonic games have dealt with this before, or opting for a more traditional 2D side-scrolling perspective, like the more traditional classic Sonic stages. It's the latter that I want to talk about. The 2D perspective is often at odds with the very idea of moving quickly. They do their very best here in the game to try and alleviate the issue, favoring the side that Sonic is approaching and designing the stages in such a way as to mostly avoid surprises. But it feels more like a hindrance than something to breed creativity. Aside from the mandatory content and ways to circumvent the requirements of that content with carp-based currency, there are also many dedicated puzzles that are attached to the beacons that reveal more of the map. Completing these puzzles isn't required, but does make navigation easier and often rewards you with power-up of some kind. The puzzles range in difficulty and engagement, with the simplest being of the level of, are you still holding the controller? You win! Like the machines that merely have you boost in one direction for several seconds, the machines that have you dodge left and right with a very generous time limit, or the machines that have you parry a certain number of orbs with the game's incredibly forgiving parry system that requires little to no timing whatsoever. However, some puzzles I found quite pleasant actually, like the floor puzzles that require you to walk along the tiles in a specific order without jumping or leaving the puzzle, as well as the puzzles that require you to jump from one platform to the next, lighting each. Most of them, however, are just paltry obstructions meant to function as simple engagement with little challenge. These could be replaced with simple button prompts, and not much value would be lost. Then there's the combat. The game has been touted by some as Sonic meets Devil May Cry, and as a big Devil May Cry fan, that did quite a bit of heavy lifting in getting me to play the game. Coming away from it though, it's an incredibly shallow character action game. While you can unlock new moves for Sonic, practically each one is used for the same thing: damage. And due to how static the moves are and how they lock you into their animations, there really isn't much room to express yourself. They don't offer much utility, just damage. The enemies themselves also hinder this somewhat, as they each require a specific approach to deal with them, limiting your options. Of particular annoyance are the basic grunts, who gain the ability to turn into an invulnerable cylinder, requiring you to expend a resource to take them out quickly, though you only have enough of this resource for 2 enemies at a time, and the grunts always come in groups of 4. Alternatively, you could take the slow route and try to wrap them all with your Psyloop ability, which will break all their guards, but not for long, often requiring you to do this several times as Sonic lacks quick, consistent area attacks. There are umbrella enemies that very cutely summon several orbs for you to use as targets for your homing attacks so that you may approach them and take them out. And these guys aren't particularly annoying when you want to fight them, though they do seem to sport some sort of invincibility before they become fully active, forcing you to play their game. But the fact that the camera will drag itself to center them, even when you want nothing to do with them, can be quite irritating, especially when you're traversing the open world. Of all the enemies in the game, the only one that I had any real joy facing would be Sumo, but I feel that might be because he could be dispatched so quickly and easily and that he posed no real threat, rather than any actual fun that I had. The rest are either irritating, like I mentioned, or ultimately unremarkable. Though there is one that I want to mention in particular that vexes me to an unreasonable degree. Strider. I won't go into it too much, but basically due to the mix of random Electro Ball rail swapping and Strider's massive legs obscuring the screen, I had a bear of a time dealing with him. Maybe it was just a fluke, but the Electro Balls would switch lanes just as I passed them on several occasions, causing them to collide with me without me noticing, to the point that it almost felt intentional. I also couldn't consistently jump over them without falling off and having to climb back up, so it was difficult to avoid them altogether. No other enemy had caused me such irritation or frustration except maybe Caterpillar? But I still say that Strider is the one that I like the least. Beyond the basic brutes and the milquetoast mini-bosses are the final bosses of the islands, the Titans. There are 5 islands in total, and you fight Titans at the end of 4 of them. These bombastic confrontations are accompanied by awesome lyric music as Sonic channels the Chaos Emeralds to wield his supersonic power. These encounters are great. They play up to the spectacle of a final boss fight each time, reminiscent of some scenes in Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance almost to a comical degree. They're big, they're goofy, they're fun, and honestly, I wouldn't have them any other way. Well, with the exception of one. The only one that proved any kind of difficult was the last one, and I'd chalk that up to poor feedback to the player. I wasn't sure I was doing the correct thing, so I reverted back to doing what worked in the past, flailing like a small angry child. I succeeded, albeit very slowly and without satisfaction. This might have been a me issue, but it did sour my experience a bit, especially since that's the last boss fight if you aren't on the hardest difficulty. If you are, there's another fight, but it's completely different in its gameplay style. An Ikaruga-style bullet hell shooter, which isn't exactly the best way to end the game, I feel, but your mileage may vary on that. Ultimately, my experience with Sonic Frontiers was mostly negative, with some bits of levity. The world, I feel, is too big and too empty to really immerse the player. The size isn't really the problem, but it's the lack of substance, as each island is practically the same scenic set of playground equipment. The story doesn't tread any particularly interesting ground, short of the potential familiar relationship between Eggman and Sage. The rest of the cast might as well be paper dolls that repeat the same schlock they have since they've been introduced, Tails in particular. The core gameplay, while tighter than any Sonic game I've ever seen, doesn't have much in depth in combat. And worst of all, the collective package feels more like a gussied up tech demo than a game. If this was sold as a budget title at $20 or $30, it might be an interesting experiment for Sega and for Sonic, and I'd love to see what came of it. However, it isn't $20. It's currently $60, a full-price title, and I can't in good conscience recommend that anyone purchase it for that price, even die-hard Sonic fans, who assuredly would take umbrage with something I've said in this video. To which I say, you deserve better. This character has survived over 30 years based almost solely on his visual design and the goodwill of its fanbase. Your goodwill. You don't deserve a 6 or 7 out of 10 at this point. The director of the game, Morio Kishimoto, has come out and said that Sonic Frontiers would function as a sort of playtest, with their team gathering data to help them make the next game better, seeing what works and what doesn't. I doubt they're listening to anything like this video. I have no such delusions of grandeur, but in order for Sonic Frontiers 2 to at least be as good as how many people think Sonic Frontiers 1 is, we shouldn't settle for mediocrity. Now, I'm not accusing people of lying, no, but I do suspect that the general expectation for what makes a good Sonic game has gone down. While these are some neat ideas to inject into this long-running series, being direct with what's bad is just as valuable, if not more valuable, than praising what's good, especially with a series with such a chaotic level of quality control. There's some really good pieces here, though. The bombastic boss fights, the potential growth of long-standing characters into something different, the tight controls that are facilitated by the open space, all of these things are to be praised. They did good, really good, but I feel that there are a few shining examples in what is ultimately a very flawed video game. I've spoken a lot, but what do you think?